Hello there. British Prime Minister Liz Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer Kwasi Kwarteng have approached their opponents within the party, or they reached out to them. The medium-term budget will be presented at the end of October. And the Bank of England is stepping up its government bond purchases. And, as I said, Kwarteng is already making another U-turn. But some Tories still only speak of Kwasi Kwarteng. The week began for Kwasi Kwarteng as the last one had started, with a U-turn. The British Finance Minister did not actually want to explain until the end of November how the government's controversial tax cut plans are to be financed, but that was not possible. The pressure from the financial markets was so great that on Monday he announced that the date would be brought forward by almost a month. On October 31st, Kwarteng intends to present what the markets have long expected of him. A strategy that is as credible as possible for how the £1 billion relief package is to be paid for, without driving government debt to horrendous heights. If he can, we'll see. Britain hasn't calmed down since Kwarteng presented the government's so-called growth plan 2 weeks ago. The British pound has been able to make up for the massive loss in value against the US dollar, but the situation remains tense. How much was shown on Monday when the Bank of England announced that it was expanding its program to buy up government bonds. Still not on top. The central bank announced that it would no longer just buy bonds worth £5 billion a day, but double that. The campaign totals £65 billion and is set to expire on Friday. At the end of September, the Bank of England announced that it would buy as many government bonds as necessary to ensure financial stability. This was also urgently needed after the pound lost massively in value and the yield on 30-year British government bonds rose to over 5% for the first time since 2002. 5% yield means that the British government has to pay 5% interest to get a loan for this term on the international financial markets. With its purchases, the central bank ensured that interest rates fell again and that the state could borrow more cheaply. Basically, the Bank of England operates the same form of indirect state financing as the European Central Bank did during the euro crisis, which the British always complained about. The British Central Bank also announced that it would set up a so-called facility, that means a kind of money pot, to provide banks whose customers are struggling with the sudden financial bottlenecks with loans. Many companies are struggling with the rise in interest rates now. The situation is familiar for private customers who need to renew a real estate loan, for example. Unlike in Germany, most British loan agreements do not run for 10 years, but usually 2 to 5 years. We even have 30 years and stuff like that. Many homeowners are therefore concerned that the cost of financing their home will increase sharply. As it turns out, this concern is entirely justified. The Bank of England is likely to raise interest rates further from the current 2.25% at its next regular meeting in early November. The central bank wants to lower the inflation rate from the current 9.9%. It is questionable whether this will succeed because the government's economic policy plans run counter to this goal. Prime Minister Liz Truss and her Finance Minister Kwarteng want to trigger a growth spurt with tax cuts. Even though the two have withdrawn their plan to lower the top tax rate, there are other projects that should result in citizens having more money in their pockets. For example, the so-called basic tax rate will fall from 20 to 19%. Added to this are the reductions in social security contributions and tax breaks for companies. All of this is intended to simulate consumer demand, which, however, should result in prices tending to rise, and thus inflation. Finance Minister Kwarteng, however, does not want to know anything about this. When he travels to Washington this week for the meeting of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, he will have to explain his point of view. The IMF had previously criticized the British government's plans in an unusually clear manner. London should reconsider the tax cuts, they said. Even if the reduction in the top tax rate is off the table for the time being, there are still other projects whose financing is unclear. Kwarteng will have to provide answers in Washington. The rating agency Moody's, for example, warned that Great Britain was about to risk its reputation for stability. You might have seen this in other videos of mine. Not only on the stage of the international financial world, Kwasi Kwarteng is struggling to improve his image again. He is also counted in his own Conservative Party. Some Tories only speak of quasi-Kasi, as I said. And even when it comes to the question of saving the Union, things are not calming down for the British government. Although a referendum failed in 2014, Brexit changed everything. The highest British court is now advising whether a new attempt could be possible, and that against London's will. Can the Scottish government vote on whether Scotland should become independent without the consent of London? This is to be heard at the highest British court from today, this Tuesday, when I'm filming this. But a British constitutional expert still sees many hurdles in Scotland's struggle for independence. Even if the Supreme Court decides in favour of the Scottish government, the British government could still stop such a referendum. That was said by political scientist John Curtis from the University of Strathclyde, and he told this to the German press agency. And Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon wants her compatriots to vote in autumn 2023, provided the court gives the green light, whether or not Scotland should become independent from the United Kingdom. So far, it has been assumed that the central government in London has to agree to a referendum. Sturgeon is now asking the Supreme Court whether she has the authority to schedule the vote without that approval. However, expert Curtis does not consider it a given that the decision will be in favour of Edinburgh. In particular, when the Scottish government in the referendum, as in 2014, wanted to ask the people directly for yes or no on independence, many lawyers are of the opinion that this reduces the chances of success. If the Supreme Court still rules in Sturgeon's favour, London can still pass legislation that could prevent a referendum, Curtis said, and the British government already talked about this. In addition, it's possible that the Supreme Court may decide not to judge the issue at all. The more unclear the decision becomes, the more difficult it is for the Scottish government to use it politically, said the expert. In any case, patience is still required. A decision should only come weeks later. In the first referendum in 2014, a majority of Scots voted to remain in the Union with Great Britain. For London, the question is thus decided in the long term. However, Sturgeon rightly argues that Brexit, which the Scots clearly rejected in 2016, has changed the situation. She wants to lead an independent Scotland back into the EU. And since Brexit is showing more and more that it does not bring any advantages for the general population, but only quite a number of disadvantages, this can become an important argument for the Scottish government. Oh, and I must not forget, I just saw the fun ideas some of you had on my PayPal. The comment on a payment for Mark's Get Well Soon fund was quite funny and of course really appreciated. Funny that more than one had the same idea, by the way. I love it. And so thanks a lot, guys. And as you can hear, I'm not there yet, so this today will once again be a single video. The noon and evening videos and the videos on the other channel still have to wait. When you have a man flu, you finally do realize how even physically challenging this YouTube job is. I will return to my life-saving sofa soon and see you all tomorrow morning. But I'll be back.